Hello and welcome back to another update in the Russo-Ukrainian war. The only territorial changes we've seen over the past 24 hours have been in the north of Avdiivka, where we've seen that the Russians have managed to gain further advances in this direction. There is this geolocated footage here, which shows Russian positions here in the Dacha area being hit by a Ukrainian tank in the area. So it seems that the Ukrainians still have tanks operating in this area months into the Avdiivka fight, and we're seeing that the Russians are struggling to advance, but they have managed to do so nonetheless, despite the Ukrainian resistance. So we're seeing that fighting is taking place here in the Dacha area in the northeast of Avdiivka, where the Russians are slowly advancing and pushing back the Ukrainian forces, who are using their armored vehicles to try and prevent Russian advances, but the Russians are advancing nonetheless. The fighting in the Avdiivka direction is continuing with this slow grind by the front line. We've seen no attempts by either side to launch massive assaults. The Russians haven't launched any assaults since they started doing these slow advances in the Stepovo direction and here in the north by the Dacha areas. We've seen no advances by the Russians through the end of December in the southeast in the residential area, nor have we seen any advances in the direction of Severne. This is likely due to the positional fighting that is currently taking place and the terrible weather taking place. At the same time, we also see that the Ukrainians are not launching any counterattacks that are in any significant form. This is something that can be collaborated with these two articles. The first one is this one, which was reporting on the situation in Avdiivka, describing it as Russia launching its zombie soldiers against Avdiivka. This reminds of the fighting in Bakhmut, where the Ukrainians were claiming that the Russians were launching mid-wave tactics, just sending infantry with no support or anything, and then created fake pictures of massive casualties on the Russian side, which were never proven to be anything. And in the end, there was a lot of discussion about whether or not it was real, but in the end, it didn't even matter because the Russians managed to capture Bakhmut in the end. And this is a similar kind of scenario where later on behind this paywall, they talk about how the Ukrainians are suffering from a lack of artillery shells. They are rationing whatever they have available to try and deal with the Russian forces attacking their positions. The greatest strength of Avdiivka is, as is written here, the fiercest trench in Donbass. It's also the heavily fortified area in the Donbass. So the Ukrainians have heavy defenses. They're able to prevent any Russian breakthrough due to the nature of these defenses being so heavily fortified. However, with the rationing of supplies, they're not really able to use everything they have available to their fullest potential because of the lack of ammunition, and therefore they have to do what they can, not what they need to do. And this is why we're seeing that the Russians are able to advance even despite the heavy fortifications the Ukrainians have available in the area. As for why they're not launching any counterattacks, what tanks they have available, they are spread out across the front. We also see that the Americans sent some Abrams tanks to the Ukrainians, which we haven't seen at the front line yet, despite them being sent over 2 months ago. And then this article here by Forbes, which was recently uploaded, talks about this and mentions how the American-made M1 Abrams tanks that were sent are extremely weak and are not able to be used as they are. They need to be refurbished first, especially its armor. It first talks about the top-down armor, starting with the roof. It is big and really thin, about 25 millimeters. So any old anti-tank charge can be put on an FPV drone, and a single FPV drone could destroy the tank completely and even kill or injure the crew. That is what is written here by this tank expert. So we're seeing that the top-down armor of the Abrams tanks is extremely weak and extremely vulnerable to even the weakest of drones that the Russians have available. And we have seen statistics based on official numbers from Russia itself that they had about 22,000 civilian drones being sent to the front to help out in the war effort throughout 2023. So if just one of these can destroy an Abrams tanks, then what can 22,000 do? And based on that, we can see that the Abrams would essentially just be sitting ducks on the front line. As soon as they're detected by the Russians, they can just send FPV drones out against them and they will be down, similar to the Challenger tank, which ended up being destroyed without really seeing any combat. And there's still tons, actually a dozen more Challenger tanks, which we still haven't seen at the front line, as only one was confirmed to be destroyed. So based on that, we see that the British Challenger tanks and the American Abrams tanks simply are not prepared for this sort of war, and they cannot really even be used. The Leopard 2A4s are the most useful ones for the Ukrainians, yet we also see through the Ukrainian summer offensive that despite how much better the Leopard 2A4 is compared to these, when it comes to this sort of combat, they were also destroyed in large amounts during the Ukrainian summer offensive. So despite the, I believe, over 100 Leopard tanks being sent to Ukraine, they still are not enough to allow the Ukrainians to launch any sort of armored offensive due to the weakness of their armor. So not taking into account the fact that they didn't even receive close to enough to the amount that they wanted to launch the offensive and now defend their cities, they aren't even ready for the war that they're fighting. The nature of the war they're fighting, these weaponries are simply too outdated. They need to be improved, need to be updated, need to be refurbished before they're able to fight in this war, yet they are not. And this is why we're not seeing any Abrams tanks in the front, because in the end, they wouldn't really be any useful at all. Despite it, even if it was refurbished, even if it was prepared for this sort of war, it's all but inevitable that Ukraine will lose some of its four-person 68 tons. 68 tons, that is about 20 tons more than the Russian T-90 tanks, T-90M, T-72, B3s, T-80, BBM, so on. The Russian Soviet tanks are all lightweight tanks. They are about 40 to 50 tons, while the M1 Abrams is 68 tons. And if you look at the weather right now in Ukraine, none of these will be able to drive through the muddy fields. So the fact that these were sent and received to Ukraine in October also has an impact on whether or not we actually see them on the front. And we haven't seen them on the front because it's been mud weather since. So the answer as to why we're not seeing any Ukrainian counterattack here in the Avdiivka direction isn't because they don't want to, but because they simply cannot, because their armored vehicles are not suitable to the current weather and the current nature of the fighting. They need to be refurbished and they need to wait until the weather improves. In the direction of Pervomaisk, there were some developments here where I reported yesterday that the Russians managed to advance here in this direction. There have since been reports that the Ukrainians decided to withdraw from this central part of Pervomaisk due to the risk of the Russians simply encircling their positions from a three-pointed assault from the north, southeast, and southwest. However, this has not been confirmed yet by Syriac maps, so I'm leaving this area as is until further reports confirm this information. So that's it for the developments over the past 24 hours. That's going to be it for this video. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.